No one wants to be locked away in a prison with bad conditions and even other bad people. And it seems since the time of locking people up for their crimes, there have been amazing stories of people escaping heavily guarded prisons. From tunnels to helicopters, it's amazing what prisoners will do to escape prison. Check out these 10 unbelievable prison escapes in history. Parkhurst Escape, 1995. Of all the prison escapes, the Parkhurst Escape was probably the most creative one. In January of 1995, Andrew Roger, Keith Rose, and Matthew Williams escaped from the high-security Parkhurst prison by constructing their own tools. The escape was the culmination of long and detailed preparations which rivaled those of the British prisoners of war in Colditz. The three men had made tools, a steel ladder, and a gun, and had acquired blank ammunition. They also made a key to open all the doors and gates, and they managed to accumulate more than $250, around £200 sterling. On the evening of the escape, the three men had stayed in the sports hall after exercise time. No one noticed that the party of 10 had shrunk to 7 back on the wing. The men walked 200 yards without being noticed, using their key to open doors along the way. They then cut their way through a mesh fence before scaling the outside wall. The escaping men, in their own clothes, walked to Newport and took a taxi 9 miles to Sandown. They then spent 4 days trying to steal an aircraft and several boats. Finally, they were caught after being spotted by an off-duty prison officer. Despite this, their escape was a brilliant one. The Libby Prison Escape, 1864. This is arguably one of the most legendary prison breaks in history. On the night of February 9, 1864, 109 prisoners squeezed through a narrow tunnel and fled a Confederate prison, notorious for its wretched and overcrowded living conditions, starvation rations, and the cruelty of its commanders. Of those escaping, 48 were captured, 2 drowned, and 59 successfully reached Union lines. 2 prisoners named Thomas Elwood Rose and A.G. Hamilton started to work on this escape in September 1863. Working with penknives, it took them 2 weeks to break through the wall and create a pathway below to a so-called rat room. Over the next 6 weeks, the two worked with a few other prisoners to dig 3 tunnels. Many of the men helping Rose and Hamilton lost the courage to continue. But in late January, the two began to dig a 4th tunnel under a lot adjacent to the prison's east wall and past a fence surrounding a tobacco shed. Rose and Hamilton recruited 13 other prisoners and organized them into 3 shifts so that the work could continue around the clock. They completed the tunnel on February 9th, and eventually 21 majors and colonels, 35 captains, and 53 lieutenants had crawled their way to freedom using the tunnels. The Great Escape, 1943. The story of this escape was so famous that it was eventually made into a film of the same name. A South African named Roger Bushell, who got in Dulag Luft, a prisoner transit camp for Air Force prisoners near Frankfurt, attempted to escape in 1941 and 1942. Both of them were unsuccessful, during which he was recaptured. In October 1942, Bushell was placed in Stalag Luft III, a Luftwaffe-run POW camp in what is now Western Poland. Soon he organized his 3rd escape, which was a 15-month operation to dig 3 tunnels out of the camp. In 1943, 200 officers prepared their escape through the completed tunnel. Only 76 men, including Bushell, managed to make it clear of the camp, and 73 of them were recaptured within the next few days. Bushell boarded a train but was recaptured at the train station in Saarbrücken, nearly 500 miles away in eastern Germany. The day after the escape from Stalag Luft III, Hitler had given personal orders that every recaptured escapee was to be shot, and 50 of them were actually executed, with Bushell being among the officers shot by the Gestapo. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers escape from Alcatraz, 1962. Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay was a federal prison from 1933 to 1963 and housed prisoners who had proved disruptive in other jails. A mile and a half offshore, it was claimed to be escape-proof. There were 14 escape attempts in the prison's 30-year history. The most famous came in June 1962 when Frank Morris and brothers John and Clarence Anglin, all of whom were serving long sentences for robbery, escaped through air vents, cut the perimeter fence, and improvised a raft using plywood and raincoats. They had left papier-mâché dummies in their cell to fool the guards, and their escape was not detected until the morning. Their broken-up raft was found in the bay, and so the officials think that they were drowned in the sea. But it is widely believed that these 3 did actually make it to the shore. In 1979 was made a film called Escape from Alcatraz, which implies that they made it to the shore. Pat Reed and Ari Neave escaped from Colditz, 1941 to 1942. There were multiple escapes from Colditz, a Renaissance castle in eastern Germany near Leipzig. 15 prisoners made it out of this place alive. The first to escape was French Lieutenant Alain Larrey, who did so on April 11, 1941. He managed to get out of the castle by hiding in a terrace house in a park during a football game. Seizing the moment, he managed to reach neutral Switzerland and freedom. Another French officer worthy of mention was Lieutenant Pierre-Marie Lebrun, who escaped on July 2, 1941. After a failed attempt by climbing into the rafters of a pavilion during exercise and waiting until dark, he later vaulted over a wire in the park with the help of an associate. He then reached Switzerland in 8 days on a stolen bicycle. There was also the legendary British Lieutenant Ari Neave, who escaped earlier on January 5, 1942. Neave crawled through a hole in a camp theater after a prisoner performance to a guardhouse, then boldly marched out dressed as a German soldier. Reaching Switzerland 2 days later, Neave later joined M19, the department of the British War Office dedicated to helping POWs escape. The Midnight Express, 1975. The Midnight Express has been one of the most famous prison escapes of modern times. Billy Hayes, a 23-year-old student from New York, was sentenced to 4 years in a Turkish prison in 1970 for attempting to smuggle hashish out of the country. Several weeks before the end of his prison sentence, his sentence was extended by an additional 30 years. Hayes was given a job on the docks, but he escaped to Istanbul using a rowboat in the year 1975. Hayes then dyed his hair to change his appearance and fled to Greece. Luckily, when he was captured in Greece, he was deported to America. His story was later the subject of a popular book and the Academy Award-winning film, The Midnight Express. Pascal Paillet escape 2007. This Frenchman has a knack for Hollywood-style escapes. At 43 years old, Pascal Paillet had been serving a 30-year sentence for killing a guard during the holdup of an armored car. In 2001, he fled a French prison by helicopter. In 2003, he again used a chopper to help 3 others escape the same facility. After he was recaptured, Paillet escaped yet again in an even more dramatic jailbreak in 2007. A helicopter was hijacked in Cannes and then flown to a state penitentiary in Grasse, where it landed on the prison's roof. 4 masked men jumped out with pistols and sawed-off shotguns, busted their way in, and came out with Paillet. The well-planned breakout took only 5 minutes and was the second time the killer Pascal Paillet had used a helicopter to escape from jail. That unleashed a massive search for the men, and 3 months later, Paillet was caught in Spain. It's unclear whether he's got another dramatic escape in him, but time will tell. Alfred Hinz escapes, 1957. Alfred George managed to escape from not 1 but 3 heavily guarded prisons during his life. In 1953, he was arrested for jewelry theft and sentenced to 12 years in prison. 2 years later, he managed to open a locked door, climbed a 20-foot prison wall, and escape. After spending 248 days as a fugitive, he was finally arrested in 1956 by Scotland Yard and was again sent to prison. However, Hinz filed a complaint against the officers who arrested him, and during one of his hearings at court, he managed to get his hands on a padlock and lock the 2 prison escorts in the toilet. He successfully escaped the courthouse on foot, but was arrested only 5 hours later on the London's airport. Only a year later, he managed to escape yet again from a high-security Chelmsford prison. This time, he managed to stay free for 2 years, during which he consistently petitioned his legal case to the authorities. He publicized the story of his life as much as he could, which created great public interest for his court cases. After Hinz got out of prison, this time legally, his memoirs and public appearances made him an instant celebrity in England. The Maze Breakout, 1983. Unlike other prison escapes where the prisoners tried to escape as quietly as possible, the Maze Breakout was filled with action and drama. In 1983, 38 Irish prisoners led by Bobby Story and Gary Kelly escaped from The Maze, one of the most escape-proof prisons in Europe, located on the west of Belfast. The prisoners overpowered the guards, hijacked a bus or lorry if you prefer, and crashed through the main gate. 4 officers were stabbed, 19 prisoners were apprehended, including Story, who received an additional 7 years for his participation in the escape. The remaining 19 were shuttled to safe houses and some were sent to the US and other countries. Kelly and Brendan McFarlane, another escape leader, were eventually returned to the prison after being extradited from Amsterdam. Chai Gap Hoax Escape. Chai Gap Hoax Escape is probably one of the most unbelievable prison escapes of all time. Choi Gap Bok, who had practiced yoga for 23 years, was arrested on suspicion of robbery in 2012 and was put in a detention cell at the police station in the city of Daegu. He stayed there for 5 days, but one early morning he applied skin ointment on the upper part of his body and slipped out of the slammer by squeezing through a tiny food slot at the bottom of the cell. The entire escape only took him 34 seconds. The space that Choi slipped through was only 5.9 inches tall and 17.7 inches wide, and he made his escape while 3 prison guards were sleeping. To keep the guards off his trail, he reportedly used a technique seen in The Shawshank Redemption and covered pillows with blankets to make guards think that he was still in bed. Choi's daring escape has inspired journalists to call him the Korean Houdini, but his escape may not be long-lasting. We hope you enjoyed the video. Which one of these do you think was the greatest escape? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked the video and want to see more, click on the subscribe link and you'll be notified when we release a new one. We appreciate you and want to thank you for watching Interesting Facts.